Something just changed, and almost no one is talking about it. Not publicly, not clearly. But behind closed doors, in intelligence briefings and military corridors, a single phrase has started to appear again and again: secure the uranium before it disappears. Because according to multiple strategic leaks and escalating signals, there is a growing belief that Iran may be sitting on something far more dangerous than anyone expected. Not just enriched uranium, but a hidden, mobile, possibly undisclosed stockpile, one that could shift the balance of power overnight. And now a controversial plan is forming, a plan tied to one man, a plan that could trigger the most dangerous confrontation in decades. Donald Trump, preparing for a move that insiders are calling the seizure option. But what exactly does that mean? And why now? For months, tensions between the US and Iran have been building quietly, not with dramatic headlines, but with small, calculated signals. Unusual naval movements, silent surveillance flights, and a sudden increase in intelligence activity around Iran's nuclear infrastructure. At first, it looked like routine monitoring. Then something changed. Satellite analysts began noticing irregular transport patterns, convoys moving at night, avoiding known nuclear facilities, heading into areas that don't match any declared sites. No official explanation, no inspection access, just movement. And in geopolitics, unexplained movement is never random. It means something is being hidden or prepared. Now, here's where it gets more intense. Behind the scenes, US intelligence agencies reportedly began reassessing a critical assumption that Iran's nuclear material is centralized, trackable, contained within known facilities. But what if it isn't? What if Iran has already dispersed its most sensitive uranium into secret locations, smaller, harder to detect, impossible to strike without massive collateral damage? And if that's true, then everything changes, because it means a traditional military strike wouldn't stop anything. It would only delay, or worse, accelerate the unknown. This is where Trump enters the picture again, not just as a former president, but as a figure increasingly influencing strategic thinking around Iran. According to emerging reports and policy discussions, Trump's inner circle has been exploring a far more aggressive doctrine: not containment, not deterrence, but direct seizure, a radical shift in strategy. Instead of waiting or negotiating, the idea would be to locate, isolate, and physically take control of Iran's enriched uranium stockpile before it can be weaponized or moved beyond reach. Think about that for a second. Not bombing it, not sanctioning it, but going in and taking it. But how would that even be possible? Iran is not a weak state. Its nuclear infrastructure is deeply embedded, heavily guarded, and spread across a complex network of facilities. Any attempt to seize material would require precision intelligence, rapid deployment, and near perfect timing, because the moment such an operation begins, it would trigger immediate retaliation, regional escalation, possibly even a wider conflict. And yet, despite the risks, the idea is gaining traction. Why? Because of one terrifying possibility: that Iran is closer than ever to achieving something irreversible, not necessarily a finished nuclear weapon, but the capability, the threshold, the point where it no longer matters what the world says, because the balance has already shifted. And once that line is crossed, you can't go back. So the thinking becomes simple, dangerously simple. Act before that moment arrives, even if it means doing something unprecedented, even if it means stepping into a situation where one wrong move could ignite a full-scale confrontation. But here's the twist no one is openly discussing. What if the US doesn't actually know where all the uranium is? What if the intelligence is incomplete? Or worse, what if Iran wants the world to think that? Because creating uncertainty is one of the most powerful weapons in modern conflict. If your enemy doesn't know what you have or where it is, they hesitate, they miscalculate, and sometimes they make desperate decisions. Which brings us back to the plan, because if Trump or any leadership structure aligned with this thinking moves forward with a seizure strategy, it won't just be about taking uranium. It will be about taking control of uncertainty itself. And that is where things become truly unpredictable. Because Iran is not standing still, it is watching, adapting, and possibly preparing its own response to a threat it knows is coming. a response that may not look like a direct attack, but something far more complex, more strategic, and far harder to stop. And the moment that response begins, everything changes, not just for the US and Iran, but for the entire region and maybe the world. But what intelligence triggered this sudden urgency? What exactly did analysts discover that made seizure even a conversation? And why are some insiders warning that the real danger isn't the uranium itself, but what Iran might do before anyone can reach it? That's where the story takes a darker turn, and what comes next could redefine everything we thought we understood about this conflict. The warning didn't come from a headline, it didn't come from a speech, it came from a pattern that wasn't supposed to exist because deep inside classified intelligence reports, analysts began noticing something that didn't make sense. Not one anomaly, not two, but a chain of movements that, when connected, formed a picture no one was ready to accept. It started with logistics, fuel shipments diverted without explanation, military convoys moving without standard escort patterns, and most importantly, specialized containment units, the kind used for transporting radioactive material, appearing in places they had never been seen before. These weren't routine transfers, they weren't aligned with any declared nuclear site, and they weren't tracked through normal channels. It was as if something had been quietly removed from the map and put into motion. At first, analysts pushed back false positives, misinterpretations, coincidences. But then came the satellite overlays. Multiple agencies, different data streams, same conclusion. Iran wasn't just protecting its uranium anymore, it was relocating it. Now, here's where things get uncomfortable. Because if uranium is being moved, especially enriched uranium, it's not done casually. It requires coordination, shielding, timing, and absolute secrecy, which means one thing: this wasn't a reaction. This was a planned operation. And if Iran had already begun dispersing its stockpile, then the window to act was no longer closing. It was already closing. This is the moment where strategic thinking inside Washington began to fracture. On one side, traditionalists, those who believed in pressure, diplomacy, and controlled escalation. On the other, a growing faction that saw something very different, not a situation to manage, but a countdown, because once nuclear material is dispersed into multiple unknown locations, it becomes almost impossible to neutralize without extreme force, and extreme force comes with consequences no one can fully control. And this is where Trump's doctrine starts to resurface again, louder this time, not as a theory, but as a proposed solution. According to sources close to policy discussions, the idea wasn't just to strike, it was to intercept, to identify key movements, track them in real time, and execute a series of ultra precise operations designed to capture uranium in transit, not destroy it, not disrupt it, but physically take control of it. Think about how bold that is, because intercepting moving nuclear material inside a sovereign country isn't just a military operation, it's a declaration, a line crossed that cannot be uncrossed. And yet, for some strategists, it's the only move left because striking fixed facilities, too predictable, too late, too risky. But intercepting mobile assets, that's where the opportunity lies. If, and this is a massive if, the intelligence is accurate. But here's the part that changes everything. What if Iran knows this? What if these movements, these patterns, these signals aren't just defensive? What if they're designed to be seen? Because in modern warfare, deception isn't just about hiding, it's about guiding your enemy's expectations, leading them toward a conclusion, setting a trap. Imagine this scenario. You convince your opponent that your most valuable assets are on the move. You create just enough evidence to make it believable. You let them track it, follow it, prepare to intercept it. And then, at the exact moment they act, they realize they've walked into something else entirely. An ambush, a misdirection, or worse, a strategic distraction from something far bigger happening elsewhere. This is the fear now circulating in certain intelligence circles, that the uranium movement narrative may not be the full story, that it could be part of a layered strategy, one that uses nuclear material not just as a resource, but as bait. And if that's true, then any attempt to seize it could trigger consequences far beyond what planners expect. Because the moment US forces move in, even with precision, Iran gains something powerful: justification, narrative, momentum. And in a region already filled with volatility, that could be enough to ignite multiple fronts at once, not just direct retaliation, but proxy responses, cyber disruptions, economic shocks, sudden escalations in places no one was watching. Which raises a chilling question. What if the uranium itself isn't the real objective? What if the real game is about forcing a move, pushing the US into a position where it has to act, and then controlling what happens next? Because once that first move is made, there is no reset button, no quiet de escalation, only reaction and counter reaction. And yet, despite all of this uncertainty, despite the risks, the unknowns, the potential for miscalculation, the pressure to act is still growing, faster, stronger, more urgent by the day, because somewhere in the background, there is another piece of intelligence, one that hasn't been fully revealed, one that some insiders believe is the real trigger behind everything. Not just movement, not just dispersal, but something far more alarming, something that suggests Iran may not be preparing for the future, but accelerating toward it. And if that's true, then the question is no longer if something will happen, but how soon? And what happens next could push this situation from shadow conflict into something the world can't ignore anymore. The moment no one wanted to acknowledge is now impossible to ignore. Because behind the classified briefings and quiet strategy meetings, a new phrase has begun circulating among high level analysts: threshold proximity. Not a confirmed weapon, not an official breakout, but something far more dangerous: the point where a country becomes capable of assembling a nuclear weapon faster than anyone can stop it. And according to growing concerns, Iran may be closer to that point than ever before. But here's where it gets even more intense. Because this isn't just about how much uranium Iran has, it's about how quickly it can be turned into something else: weaponization, miniaturization, delivery systems, all the pieces that turn material into capability. And the fear now is that those pieces are no longer separated, that somewhere, possibly in undisclosed locations, the final stages are being quietly aligned, not tested, not announced, just prepared. If that's true, then the entire strategy of wait and monitor collapses instantly, because once a country reaches threshold capability, there is no warning, no countdown, no second chance, only realization after it's already too late. This is why the urgency has shifted so dramatically, why words like containment are being replaced with preemption, and why the idea of seizing uranium is no longer just a theory. It's becoming a potential trigger point. But here's the paradox: the closer Iran gets to threshold capability, the more dangerous any intervention becomes, because at that stage, every move is interpreted as existential. And when a state feels existentially threatened, it doesn't respond cautiously, it responds decisively. Now imagine this scenario. A US operation begins, fast, precise, targeting what intelligence believes is a moving uranium convoy. Within minutes, the operation is detected. Iran activates its defense network. Communications spike. Missile units go on alert. Regional proxies receive coded instructions. And suddenly, what was meant to be a surgical operation starts triggering something much larger. Because Iran's response wouldn't be limited to one location. It would be layered, multi-directional, designed to overwhelm, confuse, and escalate. Strait of Hormuz, one of the most critical choke points in the world. A single disruption there could send global oil markets into chaos, shipping lanes blocked, insurance rates skyrocketing, energy prices surging overnight. Then there's the cyber domain: financial systems, infrastructure, communication networks, invisible attacks that don't explode but paralyze. And beyond that, the shadow network: groups aligned with Iran across the region, not always visible, not always predictable, but always ready. Which means a single operation, even if successful, could trigger responses in multiple countries at once. Different timelines, different tactics, all converging into one thing: escalation. And this is where the real danger begins, because escalation isn't linear. It doesn't move step by step, it jumps unexpectedly, violently. One retaliation leads to another, one strike leads to a counterstrike, and suddenly both sides are no longer controlling the situation, they're reacting to it. But here's the part that keeps strategists awake at night. What if Iran has already prepared for this exact scenario, not just defensively, but offensively? What if the dispersal of uranium wasn't just about protection, but about ensuring survivability under attack? Meaning, even if one location is intercepted, others remain untouched, hidden, ready. And if that's the case, then a seizure operation wouldn't eliminate the threat, it would only confirm it. Worse, it could accelerate whatever timeline Iran is operating under, because once conflict begins, there is no incentive to hold back, only pressure to move faster. And this leads to a chilling possibility that the very act meant to prevent escalation could become the reason it happens. Now, zoom out for a second because this isn't just about two countries, it's about alliances, power structures, global stability. If the US takes direct action inside Iran, other nations will be forced to respond, not necessarily militarily, but politically, economically, strategically. Lines will be drawn, positions will harden, and the world will begin to split along familiar fault lines. And once that process begins, it doesn't stop easily. But there's still one piece missing, one final variable that could tip everything over the edge. Because intelligence agencies aren't just worried about uranium, they're worried about timing, specifically a window, a narrow, rapidly closing window where intervention might still be possible. After that, everything changes. Some believe that window is already closing faster than expected. Others think it may have already closed. And if that's true, then any move now wouldn't be preventative, it would be reactive, which means the next phase of this story is no longer about stopping something from happening. It's about what happens after it already has. And if that moment arrives, the consequences won't be contained, they won't be controlled, and they definitely won't be predictable, because what comes next is something no one can fully prepare for. What if the moment has already passed? Not publicly, not officially, but quietly in the background. Because the most dangerous shifts in global power don't happen with announcements, they happen in silence. There's a growing belief among some analysts that we may already be living in the aftermath of a decision we never saw. A line crossed, not with a test, not with a launch, but with capability. Because once a country reaches threshold nuclear status, it doesn't need to prove it. The uncertainty alone becomes the weapon. And that changes everything. Because now the question is no longer, can Iran build a nuclear weapon? It becomes, how quickly could they use that capability if pushed? And this is where the entire concept of a seizure operation starts to unravel. Because if the material has already been processed, if the components have already been aligned, then taking uranium doesn't stop anything. It only confirms what may already be true. And yet, the pressure to act hasn't disappeared. If anything, it's intensified because leaders now face a terrifying dilemma: act too early and risk igniting a conflict based on incomplete information, act too late and risk facing a reality that can't be reversed. There is no safe timing, only different levels of risk. But here's where the story takes its most dangerous turn, because in situations like this, perception becomes more powerful than reality. If the US believes Iran is closer than ever, it prepares to act. If Iran believes the US is preparing to act, it prepares to respond. And suddenly, both sides are moving based not on confirmed facts, but on what they believe the other side might do next. This is how escalation truly begins, not with action, but with expectation. And once that cycle starts, it feeds itself. A surveillance flight becomes a signal. A naval movement becomes a warning. A statement becomes a threat. And before anyone realizes it, the situation transforms from controlled tension into something far more volatile. Now imagine the moment it breaks, not necessarily with a nuclear event, but with a miscalculation. A convoy misidentified, a strike launched on the wrong target, a defense system activated too soon. In a high tension environment like this, even a small mistake can trigger a chain reaction. And the world has seen this before. Moments where leaders stood at the edge of irreversible decisions with incomplete information and seconds to respond. But this time, the stakes are different because this isn't just about two countries. It's about a region already stretched to its limits. It's about global energy systems tied to a single choke point. It's about alliances that could pull multiple nations into the same crisis. And it's about something even deeper: trust, or rather, the complete absence of it. Because without trust, there is no de escalation, only temporary pauses. And in those pauses, both sides prepare, refine, wait until something breaks. So, what happens next? That depends on a series of decisions, some already made, some being made right now, and some that will be made in moments of extreme pressure. A decision to act, or a decision to hold back, a decision to intercept, or a decision to observe, each one carrying consequences that extend far beyond the immediate moment. Because if a seizure operation is attempted and it succeeds, it could delay a crisis, but it could also ignite one. If it fails, it doesn't just fail quietly, it escalates rapidly, uncontrollably. And if no action is taken, that silence carries its own risk because it allows the unknown to grow, to develop, to reach a point where it can no longer be influenced. This is the reality now. No clear answers, no guaranteed outcomes, only a narrowing set of choices, each more dangerous than the last. And somewhere within those choices is the moment that will define what happens next, not just for the US, not just for Iran, but for the entire global balance of power. Because once this situation crosses a certain threshold, it won't just be another geopolitical conflict, it will be something else entirely. Something that reshapes strategy, reshapes alliances, reshapes the way nations think about power and survival. And by the time the world fully understands what's happening, it may already be too late to change it. Because the most dangerous part of this story is not what we can see, it's what's happening just outside of it, unconfirmed, unspoken, unstoppable. And that's what makes this moment so critical. Because right now, everything is still in motion, still uncertain, still preventable, but not for long.